Give a round of applause for Dr. Mary Caire.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I woke up this morning at 3 o'clock to drive here, and I was kind of irritated that I had a 5-hour drive, but I was super excited to talk to all of you. God has a sense of humor, because just when I was getting a little irritated and I plugged in ways to get here, Museum of Western Art, Kerrville, pushed go, put on my favorite podcast, and started driving, which, by the way, is Invest Answers. James, if anybody watches that, he's the best. And I started driving, and it tells me to exit, and I'm thinking, wait a second, usually I go this way. There must be something going on I-35. It's rerouting me, and I know every time I disagree with Waze, I usually regret it, so I just went with it. Well, it's taking me to downtown Fort Worth from Dallas to the Museum of Western Art. Somehow, in my rush at leaving at 4 o'clock this morning, just pushed and ran and trusted Waze. And so I got really frustrated, because I'm like, I'm missing this conference. I don't know if I'm going to make it on time. And I said, you know what? Just take a breath and enjoy the ride. And for anybody who's watching online, if you haven't been to the Hill Country in April in Texas, if you haven't seen the wildflowers, you don't know what you're missing. And as soon as I gave in to the frustration and decided to enjoy the ride, turned off my podcast, sorry James, turned on some country music, looked up, and there was an eagle, a bald eagle, flying right over the interstate. And I thought, no, that can't be. And so I said, hey Siri, are there any bald eagles near Stevensville? Are there? Do you guys know? And she says, I found one here for you. It's called Bald Eagle Creek. Would you like me to take you there? I said, no. No, but I took that to mean, yes, there are bald eagles. So it was a beautiful morning, a spectacular day. I'm really happy to be here. And I learned about this through Adam Curry and his interview on Joe Rogan. And ironically, his podcast is called No Agenda. And I have no agenda for being here. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm not accepting new patients. I'm not selling anything. I'm here because I care about each and every one of you. And I hope that my words today can make a difference in your life, especially at this time when we're in the midst of the pandemic. So hopefully, some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about will be enlightening and could even save your life. The person that has given me permission to talk about his case today has been extremely generous, he and his wife. Their names are Greg and Nicole, and I just want to read the text that they sent me last weekend after they saw my podcast with TC. And it says, Dr. Caire, thank you for sharing this. I just finished listening. Everything is so true. Today was thankfully now a normal day in a life for me. I just ran over 4 miles this morning with ease and total fun, and could have gone much further if I had the time. During my run, I thanked the good Lord for providing me everything that I could ever need. My amazing wife, our wonderful marriage, our beautiful daughters, and my health. Everything else material is simply a bonus. You've served such a pivotal role, and I won't go into all of those sorts of things, but he said, we are so blessed and eternally grateful. I'm younger, happier now than I've ever been. Please feel free to share any or all of our story, and it's a personal story, or words in whatever manner you see fit. You have carte blanche. It says, if I can help just one person, one couple, one family, that would be a blessing, and we would be so grateful. Have a joyous Easter weekend. So that was last weekend. So we're going to talk about Greg and Nicole, and hopefully sharing their story is going to enlighten you on our true health potential. So let's talk a little bit about my personal journey and how I got into health. I went to medical school at LSU New Orleans back in the 90s, and I did a double residency in internal medicine and physical medicine and rehabilitation. And about 10 years into my practice of medicine, I started having some health problems of my own. And I was diagnosed with a, quote, incurable autoimmune condition. And I flew all over the country trying to find answers for myself. Prior to this, I was in pain management, and ironically, this was a painful condition. I couldn't find solutions, and I stumbled across someone who was talking about functional medicine, and I went down that rabbit hole out of desperation. And what the difference between traditional allopathic medicine and functional medicine is that traditional medicine, the way I was trained, is symptom management, basically. I mean, that's what we do. That's what we go to school for 13 years to become experts in managing symptoms. However, functional medicine is getting to the root cause of what the problem is to begin with, and trying to solve the problem and completely eliminate it, which is exactly what I did for my own health. I've had perfect health for over 10 years since going down that journey. So I did a 2-year fellowship in functional medicine, and for the past 10 years, I've been practicing holistic wellness in addition to taking care of people for regular medical needs. But I'm going to share a little bit about what I've learned along the way. I've been a doctor since 1997. Let's see here. So we've talked about, the food system being broken, the monetary system being broken. I would add probably the education system is broken, and the healthcare system, as you all know, is very broken. But what I'd like to offer you today is hopefully hope to solve that for yourselves and for your families, and empower you that yes, you can. You absolutely can. It is your most valuable asset, your health. Nothing else matters without your health. And it's the easiest thing to put last and the most important thing to put first. I want to talk to you about what I've been seeing in my practice and what really concerns me. Over the past 10 years, I've been specializing in hormonal management, and I've been testing some of my patients for hormonal abnormalities, and specifically testosterone abnormalities in young men. And I was noticing a dramatic decrease in the numbers that I was seeing in our youngest patients. And this slide is showing you in 2020 that traditional medicine was starting to recognize this as a real issue. In 2020, it was published that young men are having lower and lower testosterone levels than ever before. And the question is why? Well, if you look at root cause medicine and start looking at what actually works to improve those numbers back to normal, part of the problem is the food that we're feeding our children. And part of the solution is changing our diet. So the question is, what is the most important thing that we can do to improve normal hormone levels in young men? And we're not talking about slightly lower testosterone levels. We're talking about young men who have hormone levels that are similar to female hormone levels. Dramatic differences in testosterone levels in our young men. You can actually see it in their appearance. They have softer features. They don't have a rugged beard or a look like they used to. They're more overweight. They look more tired. They have breast tissue. So they are actually hormonally out of balance. And part of the reason for this is because the processed food that we're feeding them is causing hormone abnormalities, which is they're called endocrine disruptors. They literally act like estrogen in our bodies, and they literally clog the liver, for lack of a better word. They cause fatty liver disease, and your body isn't able to produce or process your hormones normally. So these processed foods cause hormonal abnormalities that are reversible, but you have to know how to look for them, how to identify these problems, and what to do about it. And so I'm going to show you an example of a family that came to me, and this is Greg, the person who the text was from. and his wife, Nicole, and their two children. This is before they started coming to see me. Nicole came first to see me because her parents died at a young age, and she had a friend that was having great health results. It was a patient of mine, and she came in to basically what she says, and these are her exact words, check the tea leaves and see if I can tell her whether or not she's going to die young, because her parents had both died young. And so we did do some genetic testing on her, and we did find out that she is at a very high risk for some pretty significant health problems regarding cardiovascular health and cognitive health later in life. And, when you're on the delivery side of things as a doctor and you're telling someone, and I don't want to say that this is what I told Nicole, because I don't want to get that personal with her results, but I do want to tell you that oftentimes I have a conversation with someone, and 30% of the people in this room are in this boat, that they have a markedly higher increased risk of cardiovascular disease and dementia. And if you have one copy, you have a 50%, and I'm talking about a gene called ApoE4. One copy gives you a 50% risk of dementia. How would you like to hear that news from your doctor? 2 copies gives you a 93% risk of early Alzheimer's. So I've been on the delivery side of things, and most doctors would deliver this news and say, good luck. But when I deliver this news, I can say, I'm going to do my absolute best with your help to make sure you're in the 7% that don't get it. And I feel very confident that I can do that, and I'm going to tell you how. So I can deliver this, what could seem like catastrophic information to someone, and I can say, but let's make sure you're in the 7%. Imagine how motivating that is to make changes that are positive for your health. And in many situations, getting this information saved my patients' lives during the pandemic. So because they got this information, what would be considered horrible information, prior to the pandemic, they made the necessary changes, and they didn't die of COVID. And I will say that this family did get COVID, and they did amazing. No hospitalization. Well, in this picture, they had a very high risk based on their initial labs when I saw them, their genetic markers. They actually did have a very high risk of a fatal outcome from COVID had they not made the changes. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we did, and this is just representing some of the genetic changes that we found, some genetic abnormalities that so many people have. But it makes, basically some of these abnormalities make you more likely to have inflammation in the arteries, in the blood vessels, in the veins. And that really is one of the main reasons why people are not doing well from COVID is inflammation. So, oops, sorry. Can we go back one slide? Let's go through, actually, could you go forward 2 slides? There we go. So this is Nicole and Greg after 1 year. 1 year. He went from 245 pounds to 170 pounds. He went from a testosterone level, which was the previous slide. I'll show you the testosterone slide. His initial testosterone was in the 300s, which for those of you who don't know, it really, for a normal healthy man, should be closer to 900. And without any testosterone replacement therapy, none, just lifestyle, nutrition, liver detoxification, and a lot of grass-fed beef as a main foundation of his diet, his testosterone went from 348 to 1,089. Now, he's in his mid-50s to late 50s. So he's exercising every day, he's lifting weights, he's running, as you heard from the text, but he also has completely changed processed food. He's eliminated processed food, and the most important part of his diet is grass-fed beef. Let me tell you why grass-fed beef is important as part of the foundation. it's because cholesterol is the building block for testosterone. How many people knew that? Great. So testosterone is so important. Cholesterol is so important for testosterone production. And not just any cholesterol, the type of cholesterol that you can find in grass-fed beef. So if you are on a diet that is more of the fake fats, you're going to have the wrong type of cholesterol as the building blocks for your testosterone. So we also addressed Nicole. And when Nicole first came to me, she was having brain fog, fatigue, loss of libido, weight gain, and she had this horrible chronic runny nose. She said she could go nowhere without Kleenexes were everywhere in her house, and she always had one in her hand. And we started, after we delivered this news, she was pretty motivated to go about making some big health changes. The second visit that I saw her, she had done a cleanse and eliminated processed foods. Just with that alone, she dropped 10 pounds almost instantly and felt remarkably better. So she actually had more energy by the time she came back to see me for the second visit to take on more, and she was motivated to take on more. She wanted to make some positive health changes in order to eliminate these terrible risk factors that she could have been facing. So again, eliminating processed food, very simple. Restoring normal hormone balance through bioidentical hormone replacement therapy at the time of menopause, which, by the way, if you do have the ApoE4 gene, there's a study out of Stanford many years ago that showed that not one of the elderly women that they studied who had maintained hormone replacement therapy through menopause and beyond, not one developed dementia, regardless of their genetics. So if a third of those women, statistics-wise, of the many women that were studied, if a third of them had a 50% risk of dementia, and this is studying them into their 80s and beyond, not one developed dementia in that study with hormone replacement therapy. But this is not, the pills that you would be thinking of or the traditional. This is bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. Yes. I'm talking about progesterone, bioidentical progesterone, which comes from plants, bioidentical estradiol and estriol, and testosterone. So good question. He's asking if we support them and improve their health, can they start producing hormones on their own? They will have healthier balances of the hormones that they are capable of making, but because of their age, being menopausal, they will never make the same levels that they did in their youth. But the hormones that they do make are more easily metabolized and healthier through a cleanse. So the question is, why, not only is it the cholesterol that's helping these patients have better hormonal balance, better mental clarity, better weight control, it's also the other nutrients that are found in beef. So I'll just go through a few of them. And there are many, many more, but these are some of the ones that I find most deficient in some of my patients. And remember, with standard labs, there may be a huge range of normal, and how your lab normal values are determined are they take a population, a sample of the population that are quote unquote healthy. So all comers, they knock off 2 standard deviations off of each end, and if you fall within that other outside or inside of the 2 standard deviations on each end, you're considered normal. But what they're not accounting for is normal is not always optimal, and normal is not always normal. There are a lot of abnormal people that are within those 2 standard deviations. So we are looking for optimal, not normal. And so I check a lot of these levels in my patients, the nutrients. For example, I check iron levels. I check B vitamin levels, selenium, zinc. And so just a few things that I've found as I've been testing my patients is that most of my patients have B vitamin deficiencies. Maybe not by normal medical terms, but certainly for optimal function, they're suboptimal, especially B12. Well, B12, one of the best sources of B12 is through animal protein. And not all people can absorb B12 in the supplement form. Some people have to take it in a methylated form or an injectable form. They can't absorb it for whatever reason. They can't absorb a supplement orally. So B12 is very important for mood, mental clarity, energy, metabolism, balance, so many different functions that it serves as a cofactor for, even energy production at the level of the cellular engine. So B12 is very important, and I would say probably half of my patients are at least suboptimal in B12, and of those people, almost all of them feel better with a higher B12 diet or with B12 supplementation in the right form. But keep in mind that also has to be based on their genetics. Some people can take one form of B12 and some people can't. So another thing that I see quite a bit of, and I would say probably there are a lot of people in this room who have zinc deficiency. Zinc is really important for hormonal functioning. It's important for metabolism. Low zinc is associated with weight gain and fatigue and poor immune function. And it's incredibly important for thyroid function. And I cannot tell you how many of my patients have suboptimal thyroid, and they've been to many doctors, and they've been told, your thyroid's normal. But when I look at it, I see it as grossly abnormal by looking at the big picture of, is the thyroid level there, and is it functioning properly? So I do a little bit more advanced testing. And one of the things that makes a huge difference for thyroid function is zinc replacement. Zinc is very important for the thyroid in order to make thyroid hormone, which gives you energy. Yes?
You were saying that the B12 is some people can't absorb it. Need different ways to absorb it.
Mm-hmm.
Taking it orally. Yet here we are, we have to take beef orally. So the question is B12 in beef complex with something that then shears off in the gut, or is it a precursor of B12 that then gets exchanged?
Right. So it depends on the person. The question is, what type of B12 for what patient? And that's a really complicated question that involves genetics and even antibody testing sometimes, and there's different forms of B12. So that's an individual case by case. Some people cannot absorb B12 through beef, and those people would need the attention of a specialist. But the majority of people can absorb it through beef, and the only way to know for certain is through testing. Selenium is also incredibly important, and it's a major nutrient in beef that we are deficient in, and that is especially important for thyroid hormone production. But it's also a cofactor for all sorts of metabolic needs that we have. So iron, of course, many of our, especially younger women, are deficient in iron, and that makes them tired, and that makes them suboptimal in everything that they do. So another important thing. 50%, and this is before the pandemic, 50% of our country is suffering from some sort of severe mental illness. I would argue that at least 50% of these problems are related to the nutrients that we're deficient in by the demineralized food from the demineralized land, and it's also related to inflammation, toxicity, but probably and perhaps more, and B vitamin deficiencies. Mineral deficiencies are a huge cause of mental illness. So I would argue that at least half of our mental illness problem could be managed by nutrition management and managing inflammation through a functional approach that is not just treating symptoms, but actually getting to the root cause of why they have these mental illness. And oftentimes it's genetic. And again, back to the B vitamins, sometimes B vitamins are the exact answer that they need. So let's talk about, I want to leave time for questions, but I do want to talk about what's going on with our healthcare dollars and some of the events that have been transpiring over the past few years with regard to the pandemic. So I'm going to be a little bit cautious with the way I speak about this, and I'm happy to answer questions. But there is no question that we have spent more in the past 2 years on healthcare than any time in history. I haven't seen the statistics yet, but I can tell you, just based on how much it cost for an ICU stay or for someone to be on a ventilator, I can almost guarantee you that it's far surpasses any amount that we can even imagine. The problem is that with early treatment, none of that should occur. And in fact, I don't think anyone who is at least somewhat reasonably healthy should die of this disease with early intervention. I have not had a single patient go to the emergency room. I'm sure many of you have gotten very sick. I hope that there was early intervention and that you had ultimately a good outcome, but there are some long-term consequences that also result in a huge amount of healthcare spending long-term. What I have never experienced before in my entire career is the fear that I feel when I'm talking to a patient about this, because I'm worried that if I don't say the right thing to a patient, my license could be at risk. I'm worried that if I do prescribe something that I know has scientific evidence to help early, that prescription will be refused and that I could potentially be reported for prescribing it. I've never had that happen before in my entire career. And by the way, almost all of the medications that we prescribe are prescribed, not all, but many, many, many of the prescriptions that we prescribe are prescribed, quote, off-label. So, or non-FDA approved indications, because each indication for each medication costs millions, if not billions of dollars to achieve. So once you get one approved indication, you can take a pharmaceutical agent to market, and then the doctors are taught how to use it in other ways. But why go through FDA approval for millions upon millions of dollars for each and every indication when you simply learn what things work and you, by your license and the authority that you've been given through your education, are able to prescribe for those other indications? I've never been told until now by a pharmacist, we won't fill that prescription because it's not FDA approved. That makes no sense. And I have had to go shopping for pharmacies for life-saving medications for my patients. And been threatened by some of them, saying, we're going to turn you in for writing this prescription, which is a harmless, inexpensive prescription, which with early intervention, the research is there that it works, and my personal experience with early intervention, and I've treated dozens upon dozens of cases, it works. So this is another way that, that we are being managed. In a way that may not be beneficial for you and your family. And it's concerning. It's concerning when you dedicate your life to helping someone and someone who doesn't have that authority or that education is telling you no. And that's my concern about what's going on with our food supply and our supply chain. Can somebody who doesn't have the knowledge or the education or the understanding or knowing your own personal genetics and your nutritional needs and your children's nutritional needs, can someone like that say no? They're trying. And it all started with managed care. You know, they used to, about 10 or 15 years ago, they used to have the doctors beg for pre-authorization for things that you know someone needs. So you end up spending the whole day working, and then you spend several hours in the evening writing pre-authorization letters so that patients can get what you believe is best for them. Well, that's a lot of time and a lot of effort, and almost every time that you write a pre-authorization letter, they say no. So why bother? Well, they're trying to get you not to bother to do what's best for your patient. They're actually, after they say no, they say if you want to appeal this, it's going to require a peer-to-peer review, which means you're talking to a doctor who works for the insurance company to make denies, and you go into this courtroom debate, basically, for about 30 minutes on their schedule in the middle, it's almost always in the middle of your day with your patients in the waiting room and your staff working, and you go into a full-on stressful debate to say why this patient needs this. And then at the end, they'll say yes or no. And I can be very persuasive, but how many times a day are you going to do that before you just say, forget it? So I opted out of all insurance, and I started charging out of pocket many years ago. At least 7 years ago, I opted out of all insurance and started charging out of pocket. So I've got five or 10 minutes, and I want to leave time for question. But I do want to say that that gave me the freedom for my patients who could afford it to buy what they wanted without me having to beg somebody on the other end of the phone for what they actually needed. So, but there were patients that couldn't afford that didn't have that opportunity. But at least I was getting the majority of the things that I needed that I felt were in my patient's best interest. And that was fine until the pandemic hit. And then I started being told, 1, it's not FDA approved, 2, we're not going to pay for it, and 3, we're going to turn you into the state board if you prescribe this, which is insane. It's just insane. So what I'd like you all to take away from this is that the system's broken, just like the monetary system, just like the education system, just like the food supply system. And your best opportunity to change this is to make sure that you're healthy. And the best way to stay healthy is by watching what you put in your body and eating a whole foods diet, which is in the most natural form of unprocessed food as much as possible. And then when you feel better because of what you're eating and you've detoxed to some extent, then you can take the next step to optimize your health even more, to research it, to do your own research, to make the choices that are best, find a good doctor, and hopefully this will empower you to know that you can survive challenging situations through health. Next slide. So the point of this is not to describe what's broken. It's just to instill hope. Hope is healing, empowering you to make the right choices. And the choices start with ensuring that you don't need very much from traditional medicine, through exercise, through what you eat, through being with others, being in a community. And it's a choice that's worthwhile. If you don't feel like you have enough energy to make that choice, start with something that's almost biblical. It's a 2-day bone broth cleanse. You won't believe how much better you feel after 2 days on bone broth. You'll get the mental clarity, and you'll have more energy, and you'll detoxify. And it's just, even if you can only do it for 24 hours, start there. And I was happy to hear that there are people who are sourcing good bone broth. There's a recipe on my website if you'd like to see it. It's under Good Stuff Girl recipe at marycairemd.com. But you can do it yourself, or you can find it through one of the ranchers here. But I'd like to leave a little time for questions, and hopefully this has been empowering, that Simple steps make huge differences in the quality of our life and your ability to survive things that are going on today. Yes?
When you say like a pharmacist would turn you in for prescribing certain medicines, on what grounds would a state?
So the question is, these threats from the pharmacist, there's no grounds for them. And ultimately, I was never, quote, turned in, but they did threaten, specifically at some of the big box drugstores. I was able to get what my patients needed through small family pharmacies.
If they actually turned you in, like what would happen? What's the next step?
Okay, for example, many years ago, I opted not to prescribe an opiate for someone, and that patient did not agree with my decision, and it took me a year to go through the process. Well, if you make a complaint, it's just a nuisance. Ultimately, I was cleared, and it was deemed reasonable. But you do have to go through a full year process, and oftentimes hire an attorney to show that you were doing what was in the patient's best interest, or what you felt was in the, a lot of times they use something called the standard of care, and they want to know that you're acting within the standard of care. And so it is a huge nuisance and a huge expense, but it's a somewhat fair process as far as due process, and usually it's easy to clear your name, other than the time involved and the money. Yes. Oh, yeah.
My wife and I have been going to a doctor in Dallas. I'm sure you know him. He was on the front lines, deplatformed up in McKinney over all this COVID nonsense. But he told me recently he's in the process of transitioning from insurance to pay-as-you-go kind of a deal. And he said that before too long, we will have sort of a 95% of the people will have Plan A and 5% will have Plan B. Vice versa. But he said it's time to find these networks of doctors. Are you part of a network of doctors, and how do people who don't know where to start start?
So good question. How do you find a doctor, and what is the future of who's going to pay for this? I'm not part of a network. You can't find me because I'm not accepting new patients, and I can't. And actually, during the pandemic, I took a step back and took a little bit of a break after becoming burned out treating COVID 24/7 and homeschooling. And so I took a little bit of a break and cut back on my patient numbers, going back now. But where do you find these kind of doctors? Unfortunately, they're hard to find. And I don't have an answer, but I do know through grassroots education like this and empowerment, there'll be a greater demand. And really, ultimately, the most cost-effective thing that you can do is take accountability for your own health, put your own health as your first priority, realize that it's your most valuable asset. We all spend hours and hours educating ourselves about beef and the monetary system and all of the other things that are wrong. Let's spend just a fraction of that time on putting our own health priorities first. Hopefully you won't need a doctor like me if you do that. Yes.
Thank you so much for coming down and sharing great information.
Thank you.
Can I just also ask, so you just speaking about diet in general, do you have any other just kind of broad things to watch out for? I know you said processed food. There's a lot of talk about seed oils right now.
Yeah.
Are you concerned about dairy? Just kind of more broadly, those questions.
So the question is, what are some broad take-home workable solutions? And am I against dairy? Am I against seed oil? It depends on the person. It really does depend on the person and their genetics. And probably the best rule of thumb is to do a bone broth cleanse and then reintroduce things that you think are probably that are healthy, and see how you react to them. Usually if you're eating something, sometimes you don't know how good you can feel until you've done a 48-hour cleanse. And then when you reintroduce something and you feel like you did before the cleanse, then that's probably something for you that's personally, not a good thing. Seed oils are going to be the next big chapter in health, meaning, and some people are already fully on board. I don't know if any of you've seen Nick Carter. Do you know Nick Carter? He's really into, and I love it. I love it. And I'm actually learning some things from him, and I feel better off seed oil. So for me, I've made that decision for my life and for my children's life. But it's such a personal decision. Am I anti-dairy? No, I'm not. But for some people, it doesn't agree with them, or they have allergies. So it's just such a personal, individual approach. But empower yourself with as much knowledge and try as many things as you can. And if the day that you start eating corn after a cleanse and you feel terrible, probably you need to remove that to some extent and only have it very rarely. Same thing with gluten, although I have a suspicion, I think gluten is probably it's obviously a big problem for people who have celiac and for many other people who have digestive issues, but I wonder how much of it is the interaction with what the gluten is combined with. Because there are a lot of patients that can tolerate gluten if they go to Europe for some reason, or they can tolerate gluten if they make their own bread with all natural ingredients. So it's just such a complicated question, but trial and error after a cleanse is probably one of the best ways to know if that's a healthy choice for you or not.
Okay, this is all just really fascinating, but, and ironically, I actually have 2 copies of the APO4 gene, so I feel like I'm supposed to be here because it's kind of crazy that you're talking about it. So hopefully I'm not being too specific, but I'm in a lot of different groups. I've done a lot of research, and what they say is not, if you have 2 copies especially, do not eat saturated fat. And so my family actually raises beef cattle, so of course, my mission is to prove that even with this genotype that, you can be healthy eating beef. So now to make it less specific, is there a different, is it beef is okay if it's grass-fed, or is beef okay if it's conventionally raised too? Or how do you, I guess it has to do with the cholesterol transport, is that right?
Yeah.
Why you're not supposed to eat?
So that, and thank you for sharing and being vulnerable and sharing that with us. And I would encourage you that even though you have one of those, quote, scary genetic types, which is 3% of the population, I would empower you that just because you're here and being educated, that there is a very large chance that you'll be in the 7% that's okay. It's a very tricky question because cholesterol is needed for hormone production, and hormones are the #1 way to prevent dementia with ApoE4. #1. Especially if they're started perimenopausal. So yes, you need normal hormone production, and it also depends on whether you're eating a lot of inflammatory foods in conjunction with it. Are you eating processed foods? How well does your liver detoxify? There's so many other variants. How much B12 do you have plays in on it? How much inflammatory marker, like a C-reactive protein, how high is that? So it's such an individual approach that there's no way to say yes you can or no you cannot. But speaking with a lot of experience of patients who come to me for that exact reason, we can get inflammatory markers down, we can get cholesterol at healthier levels, the good cholesterol and what they call the bad cholesterol, and it can incorporate grass-fed beef. Certainly, I do that all the time, and those patients notice mental clarity and better sleep almost immediately. So I think it needs to be monitored. And all of the other issues need to be addressed, such as homocysteine levels. Exercise is one of the best things that you can do, getting plenty of sleep, and then eating, unprocessed foods and limiting your toxins.
Last question, Dr. Caire.
Okay.
You mentioned how cholesterol is important for testosterone production. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on testosterone, or not testosterone, cholesterol-reducing drugs like statins.
So the question is, statins, do I prescribe them? It depends on your genetics and other risk factors. Sometimes we have to use something that doesn't have the best safety profile in order to prevent a catastrophic event sometimes. But my goal is to always get to the root cause and decrease other risk factors so that they're not necessary. And if I am allowing someone with a high, like a familial hypercholesterol, genetic issue, I'm monitoring their carotid ultrasound constantly. So if I do decide to avoid a statin, every 6 months I'm looking at their arteries and making sure that what I'm doing does no harm, because that's the first rule, is do no harm. And I would be going outside of the standard of what's called the standard of care if I did not prescribe that, which puts me in a very challenging situation. And every doctor that you're seeing is in the same situation. But statins have more harm than good in general associated with them, especially in women. But there are some people that benefit from them. And the biggest danger of a statin is lowering your testosterone, which causes weight gain, which causes metabolic syndrome, which increases all other risks like high blood pressure and diabetes, all of these other weight gain, all of these other risk factors that go along with that. So statins are a very tricky thing that requires a personal approach for each and every person. But in general, I do everything I can to use other methods of promoting health. If you get my drift. Okay, thank you so much. I really hope, I wish you all the best of health, and I hope there's some information that you can share with others. And if I can answer any questions afterwards, I'm happy to do so. Thank you.